Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Microsoft and PwC webinar, Unleashing the Power of Microsoft Sentinel. Today's webinar should be about 45 minutes in length. We are broadcasting this webinar through Teams live event and is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in this webinar indicates that you're consenting to being recorded in the webinar. The recording of the webinar and presentation deck will be available to you within 7 to 14 days. If you joined us without completing the registration form, please do so in the chat window. There's a registration link. This is so that you can receive the recording and the decks after the event. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. We have experts standing by to answer your questions throughout the session, and we'll conduct a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the session, so keep bringing those questions in. Thank you in advance for adhering to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct that's posted in the chat window. And with that, I will turn it over to Miriam to get us started. Miriam?
Thank you, Paulette. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm your moderator, Miriam Romani, Senior Business Strategy Manager with Microsoft Security Solution Area. In today's session, I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues from Microsoft and PwC who will touch on Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft Cloud Native SIEM solution, leveraging power of cloud, AI, and automation, providing proactive detection of evolving threats from across your enterprise. Sentinel is truly an innovative solution, named as a leader in the Forrester Wave Security Analytic Platform and Visionary by Gartner. Our colleagues from PwC will further share how they can help you to effectively and efficiently leverage Sentinel in your organization with PwC threat detection and response services. Let's get to it. With that, I will hand it off to my colleague, Richard Diver, to introduce himself and tell you all about Sentinel. Richard?
Hey, thank you very much, Miriam. Good morning, everybody. Richard Diver, I am the Senior Technical Business Development Manager, and I've been working with Azure, now called Microsoft Sentinel, for the last 2 or 3 years. And I've been working with the PwC team to help them build out their CyberOps platform as well. So I'm really keen to hear from Doug and Chris. So with that, Doug, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Lee. I'm a director in PwC's managed service platform specific to cyber operations. So I work primarily advising clients from strategy through operations for a wide variety of SIEM and UBA type projects, as well as consulting engagements for SOC transformation initiatives, improving overall operational capabilities and enhancing threat detection and response maturity levels. Later on, I'll be talking about our managed security service offerings built around Microsoft Sentinel. Chris?
Thanks, Doug. I'm Chris O'Connor. I lead PwC's threat detection and response practice. I'll date myself a little bit. I've been in the cyber managed services business since it was a thing, since the late 90s. Prior to that, I did a little bit of intel stuff in the Army, and throughout my entire commercial career, I've focused on the development of managed security services and cyber operations solutions for my clients. Today, we're going to talk about both the technology side and the operational side of cyber operations. Cyber operations can be complex and costly. PwC cyber operations practice has helped hundreds of organizations to transform their cyber operating models, helping to design, implement, and oftentimes co-operate efficient and effective cyber operations for our clients. These transformations are sometimes from a greenfield perspective, so think a TSA agreement or a corporate separation, but more often than not, they are a revamp of an existing cyber operations program, the technology, the people, the processes. In cyber defense, especially threat detection and response, oftentimes it's seen through the lens of a technical problem. And because of that, oftentimes it's thought that there's a software solution only to solve that problem. But technology is only a part of the equation. Chasing that elusive silver bullet of a pure technology solution while not recognizing the true complexity of designing, implementing, and managing effective cyber operations at an organization can lead to frustration, ongoing, unmitigated risk, and ever-escalating costs. For today's discussion, we've oriented on the SOC itself and the 3 drivers to complexity and cost in developing an effective SOC. The first of these is the organization. If the SOC's model and mission are not clearly defined, it can lead to a lack of support across the entire organization. First and foremost, efficient and effective cyber operations require a commitment. And that's a commitment to define an operating model and a mission, commitment from leadership in support of the model and the mission through investment and engagement, and commitment from the team itself. And this team is oftentimes in-house and third-party personnel working in tandem to implement, maintain, and enhance the model on an ongoing basis. Truly, there is no set it and forget it in cyber operations. It's a continuous model of maintaining the organizational structure. And the organization's cyber operations model has many interrelated elements that need to be clearly defined and documented. Activity alone does not equal success. An organization should be oriented around desired outcomes and the processes, people, and technology that will lead to them, each supported by well-structured operating procedures and KPI reporting. Second, we'll talk a little bit about over-reliance. And I touched on this before, but it's extremely important. A SOC over-relying on technology instead of proper staffing is completely out of balance. As I mentioned before, technology is a very important element, and Richard's going to get deeply into that, to what Microsoft has invested in and brought to bear, but it is only an element of a successful cyber operations target operating model. With continuous tuning and periodic refresh analysis on that technology, it can be instrumental in success, but most organizations do have an over-reliance on technology. Organizations often spend most of their security budget on technology, resulting in improperly skilled staff. On top of that, the processes and operating procedures for that staff that are already stretched thin are not well formed or maintained and rarely refreshed. Well-trained, supported staff are the key to any organization's effective cyber operations, often a combination of in-house and third-party resources. And then finally, there's overload. Overload is really too much noise coming at staff, and they're drowning in that noise. They're overloaded with information and tooling, and they're not truly getting the signal. So what's important? So not only is technology not the complete answer, it's oftentimes part of the problem. Too many point solutions that are not integrated, producing noise as opposed to true operational signal. We have found again and again that focusing on getting the most out of fewer technology pieces through better integration, better processes, better training, and more automation results in better risk mitigation outcomes and reduces cost over time. At PwC, we found that technology rationalization and process automation are often the 2 biggest bangs for the buck in the development of effective cyber operations. I'm going to hand it over to Richard now, and he can dive into a little bit on Microsoft's technology stack and all the improvements that are occurring there. Thanks, Richard.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's certainly a trend that's been happening for a few years now, is that consolidation. And the thing I like about that is it's not just a one and done, right? It's a continuous effort to keep tuning your organization from a technical infrastructure perspective, what you're investing in, how the business is changing. And it's only getting more complex. I haven't seen many companies simplify or reduce their complexity very well. So with all of this stuff out there on your network, not on your network, it's in the cloud, it's mobile, really, how do we address those kind of challenges? So as Chris was saying, having a very strong security operations team is core to that. And we're seeing a lot of our customers having success by partnering with an expert company that can bring some or all of that expertise and help bolster whatever security you already have. With that is that ability for that team, or those teams, could be a joint team, to wrap everything around, their arms around everything they have, their entire digital estate, which from COVID, a lot of companies have managed to go digital pretty quick, a lot faster than they were originally planning to, through the need to work from home and think very differently about the way their business is working. And so now it's this great time to look at how can we take all of this to the cloud? And even if we have existing investments, at some point you're going to look for buying something new and doing something different. And so that consolidation and simplification is really something that you can put at the top of the priority list to make sure that you're not adding to what is already a very complex system. So with Microsoft Sentinel, then the way that to look at this is our SIEM solution. It's now, I think, in 3 years old. It's grown pretty quick over those 3 years, and the main purpose of it isn't just to be a SIEM. As much as it is compared to other SIEMs and it's a replacement for another kind of SIEM, it's becoming more than that. It's growing in its reach. One of the things is the scalability. That capability is to get in and start using it potentially for free to start with. It's a funny word to use when you're talking about security and very complex tools. But if you start with Azure, like I'm going to keep calling it Azure Sentinel, it's Microsoft Sentinel now. If you start with that, with the capability Microsoft gives you to do a lot of the alerts from Microsoft 365 and other areas, you're going to see that that doesn't actually cost very much. It's when you start to then scale up and start adding different cloud services and your servers, your identities, your network devices, the more and more you put in, the more we can then scale up. The other side of the scalability is the fact that not every day is the same. Sometimes your company may be ticking over at a certain threshold where you can keep up with the capacity, and then suddenly, either through the fact that your business is taking off and growing, or you're having a very busy sales day, or unfortunately you're under the attack from somebody that wants to break in. Either way, that needs your security systems to scale fast by the second, or millisecond even, and that's what we are bringing with a cloud native SIEM. Then the detections and evolving threats, we have a team at Microsoft of thousands of researchers that are purely looking for the next threat, not what it happens, but what might happen in future. And we're starting to be more proactive about looking for them before they happen. And obviously, as soon as we detect anything new in any of our customers, we can use that knowledge to then share with everybody else. And that is then backed up by our partners who can do the same as well. So they have their own threat experts, their researchers and analysts and linguist experts that can really understand what's happening in the world day by day. Expediting the incident response is really key. It's great to be able to detect and find problems, but you really want to be able to answer them. How do we actually get an incident response going fast? And some of the time spent in doing incident response is just understanding what's actually happening, let alone what should I do about it. The quicker we can get to what should I do about it, the sooner you're going to reduce the potential, unfortunate wording of blast radius. We're trying to stop the scope of what it could become if we don't take fast enough actions on it. And then finally, that whole getting ahead of attackers is looking at how can I learn the lessons from previous breaches and other known issues around security vulnerabilities and make sure that my company and my infrastructure and my team and the procedures we're using aren't adding to the risk. And so we can reduce the risk by looking at the potential threats. And so this is all built in and part of not only Microsoft Sentinel, but our other services like Microsoft Defender, 365, and in Azure capabilities as well. So what this brings to the team really is about empowering any SOC team, whether you're doing this yourselves in-house or you bring in the partners to manage it for you. There are many different ways to achieve the right outcome. Most important thing to think about, and we've been working really hard on this to make sure that this isn't just a lift and shift, whatever you're paying today for a SIEM, you move it and you start paying the same again for the Microsoft version of that thing. This opportunity to deploy Microsoft Sentinel and to make that as part of your SOC operations actually helps you to reduce some of your expenses you might have today, which means you can spend that money on more important things like humans and make sure that you've got the training and the development of procedures, as Chris was saying. The tools that we're building and the abilities we have actually in the box now, without having to go through too much customization initially, decreases false positives on its own. A lot of smart AI technology, as well as, again, your security operations team being able to tweak and tune all of the settings they like, go as deep as you want to go with that, into making your customizations and reducing for what your company's specific false positives might be. And this really is this false positives, I'll just delay on that. That is what takes up a lot of the human hours. We want to reduce the amount of time humans are spent on wasting time, and we want to make sure that every moment of their day-to-day activities is spent on doing things that are actually going to reduce risk or solve problems. The time in deployment around Sentinel is anything from a day to a few weeks. It really depends again on how much customization you want to do, but it's no need to go and procure hardware. You don't need to install agents. We're talking about just turning this on in the cloud and start to ingest data from anything, anywhere. From the reduced management efforts, there isn't the servers to patch. We don't have to worry about infrastructure, disaster recovery, backup tapes, looking at multiple failover servers. And if you are a global company deploying this in multiple regions around the world, it doesn't cost more to have multiple instances of Sentinel. So if that makes sense to you, is to have your data segregated out so it's isolated in different regions or different companies. You have maybe a parent company and 5 sub-companies. You can have a Sentinel for each one of them. It won't cost any more than having just one Sentinel. Again, there's the pricing side of this is really important to understand, that it doesn't have to cost more, and it doesn't have to blow the budget. That's all. The investigation effort, we're working as talking about new things coming out. We're looking at things like the user behavior analytics, and a lot of our advanced threat analytics now is powered by automation of, we'll look through the alerts for you, including the informational and low level alerts that sometimes don't get looked at by anybody because they're too busy looking at the high and the medium alerts. We'll take all of the low fidelity and signal noise and add in our threat intelligence and just our know-how on what to look for and how to sniff out the suspicious, and elevate that up to make sure that something that might have been a few 5 or 6 benign type of alerts actually work together to become an advanced attack pattern. So we'll bring that to the investigators. And then when they start to work through the console and they start to understand what's happening, we're again bringing all of the steps they might need to plug directly into additional systems. So if it's actually an endpoint issue or an identity issue, they can jump straight from Sentinel into those platforms without having to think about having multiple screens open at the same time. It's a nice fluid movement for the operator to jump, if they have multiple platforms, to jump between them and not have to have 10 screens on their desktop to try to manage all this in one place. And then finally, the ROI. This is all from a study that we had with Forrester Consulting, that over, it doesn't have to take 3 years, it all depends on your circumstances, but over a period of time, we want to make sure that you're regaining the ROI. So again, isn't just a one-time and we're done implementation. You want to take a look at how can I continuously improve my operations and my procedures, as well as the technologies I'm using. So we will continue to, this is an evergreen cloud service, we'll continue to improve it all the time without having to charge any more money for additional bits and bobs on top of it. You'll just get it as part of the service. So I'll bring that back to how to get past these challenges is really consolidate down, start moving to the cloud, start plugging all your data in. You may find as well that with all of these different data sets and all of this attack surface scenarios you have, the attacker doesn't care that you're not monitoring it, and they don't care that you've got isolated business units and you've got things you're not monitoring. They'd love to find that, because then they can get in and attack you in spaces you didn't, or dark corners of your environment. So apart from just bringing in identity and networking and all these different services that are the common ones, start to think about areas that maybe you haven't done in the past, like your DevOps, your code, your web services that are public facing. All of the data and logistics from those should also be considered. And then train up the team, or bring in the team, to help you ensure you're staying on top of the latest and greatest threats. So with that, I'd really like to hear from Doug and hear what PwC is doing with Sentinel.
Thank you, Richard. So what I'd like to do is introduce 2 services we offer that are built around the Microsoft security stack with Sentinel at their core. So our solutions are aimed at organizations that have a presence in Azure with Microsoft services, apps, Office 365, etc. And for clients who are interested in migrating to such a business operating model utilizing the Azure cloud. So the first one on the next slide is our rapid deployment service. Next slide, please, where we will work with you to identify the required or desired security monitoring capabilities and map them to the specific Microsoft tool or service, all anchored in Sentinel, and then transition the support, maintenance, and administration to our threat detection and response cyber operations managed service platform. So as an outcome of this, you will have the advanced Microsoft security capabilities for your organization being run by PwC on a 24/7 basis. And our next one, our second solution, the rapid replacement service. This focuses on taking your existing SIEM, SOAR, and UBA platforms, taking the data sources, the rules, the alerting content, and migrating it all to Sentinel, then developing additional procedures, documentation, reporting, transitioning it to our threat detection and response service as well. So you can benefit from Sentinel's capabilities quickly and effectively while also taking a load off your existing SOC personnel by having our analysts and engineers provide the day-to-day support and 24/7 monitoring. So both of these solutions, we can offer this rapid realization of these capabilities and provide this service via our PwC accelerators. The benefits of these include things like our large library of both general and industry-specific use cases aligned to Migrate attack framework, the engineering and integration experience that we've gained from testing in our labs, and that includes things like custom data connectors, as well as our process and playbook templates. So we can also include, we also do include our comprehensive reporting and metrics programs, along with SLAs, which we will work with you to define for your specific needs or risk profiles. Both of these services include continuous enhancements and development of new use cases, automations, integrations, and playbooks based on your needs and desired level of maturity. And lastly, though, we can always work with you to define any type of customized service offerings as well through our cyber and managed services platforms. So thank you, and back to Miriam.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. We have several questions that have come from the audience, and please keep them coming. The very first question is, if my SIEM is in the cloud, how does it work with my existing services that are not in the cloud?
I can take that one if you like. So,
thank you.
Yeah, so like any SIEM, what we have is connectors for data. Now, ideally, they will have the built-in connectors. There's over 100 of those for different services, and they'll tap into the APIs of on-premises and cloud services from many different vendors. However, there are going to be some things that haven't been integrated yet, and so we have another way of doing that, which is then called a I get Richard forgetting his words today, a syslog server. And so if you have a syslog server today and you're moving your syslog, your data into your SIEM using a syslog, you can use exactly the same format to put it into Microsoft Sentinel. What we do with the data when it gets in is then normalize the data, put it into the right tables, and then present it in as alerts. So I haven't yet found anything that we couldn't ingest. So it'd be a good challenge if you find something to let me know, and we'll help you get it ingested. Doug, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, not specifically. Again, though, if there is some challenge with data ingestion, we have a significant presence in our labs for all types of different vendors and integrations that we've been testing for both data ingestion and making sure that the data quality and adjusting the correct and making sure that we acquire the correct telemetry from the data sources to fulfill the use case, the alerting use cases.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Richard. Another question is from Susantha. If we have large amount of logs to be sent to Microsoft Sentinel, is there a way to optimize them before sending it to Sentinel? Or better, do some certain queries and send the result to Sentinel instead of uploading entire log set to Azure? Richard, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I will, and then I'll let Doug take over as well. So there are ways of processing. It depends on what you mean by large. It depends on how old the data is. So if it's legacy data, we can certainly lift and shift to the cloud quantities of data and not put it into Sentinel, but at least make it available in the cloud so you have a backup and a storage, because you'll want to have years worth of archived data available from a security perspective. The data that you want to bring into Sentinel should be relevant, as in you should have detection logic for it. It may be the last 3 to 6 months worth of data would be good to bring in. And then it's about bringing in live feeds. So the sooner you get to live feeds, that's when we're looking at what's happening right now. That's really what a SIEM is looking for, is what's happening in this moment. The rest of that large data you want to bring in, whether you pre-process it and only send alerts through or dump it into a data lake in Azure without putting it into Sentinel, there's certainly options there to minimize costs and reduce the effort required. You don't want to do anything manual. So Doug, from your practices in doing this, any best practices around taking large quantities or legacy data?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think this is really where having a well-developed use cases fits in, to make sure that you're collecting the correct data for the correct purposes. And I think that's what we found to be the most helpful. And we, in our use case development process and our framework, we do pay a lot of attention to that type of an effort to make sure that we get the correct data for the correct reasons.
And just to elaborate a little bit more on that, and to Richard's point, there's, and even to Doug's, because there's different requirements around data and you're collecting it for different reasons, you want to be pretty purposeful in where you want to put it, how you want to move it, both from a cost perspective and from an efficacy of the tooling that you're applying it towards. So when you're using a detection type technology like Sentinel, you certainly want it, even if you're doing threat hunting or real-time detections, you want that the types of logs you're importing and the data that you're collecting from those systems to be purposeful towards the use cases you're using to detect. If you're doing something for longer term forensics or for compliance, you'll probably want to use a different storage mechanism, and maybe that's in the cloud, maybe it's your existing legacy one, and it's usually a transition and a roadmap, and that's what PwC can help with. We can help you kind of define the process, the analysis, the mapping, and then help move you towards that in a deliberate fashion.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have one other question that I think we have time for. How do you automate your SOC processes so that you can sort out my incidents and inform me as a customer what needs to be done? Do you fix the problem, and do you use ServiceNow?
I could take that one if you want first, and then maybe
sure, Chris.
And it to Doug afterwards. So we have a internal ticketing system that we call Client View, and it interoperates with our client's ITSM system or directly with Sentinel or other SIEMs. And what we will do is we will take an event as far as the client wants us to take it, all the way through to remediation. But what we don't do is mitigation from a rebuild perspective. So if it's host isolation, if it's other types of remediation, we'll take that, whether it's L1, L2, or L3 type functionality from an operations perspective. We use logic apps when we're in the Microsoft world to do automation, SOAR type functionality, contextualization, or automated response. All of those are through documented SOPs. And if there's manual requirements throughout the SOPs, we'll do that as well. So again, it kind of goes back to the use case, then the operating procedures against that, whatever automations we can apply to those operating procedures, and then the relationship we have with the client. Some clients are more open than others to have us take the remediation efforts on their behalf. If they have Defender, if they have good EDR functionality, that's generally easier to do that. Some clients would rather just have the triage and the analysis and the alerting occur. And then what we generally do is have the source of truth for SLAs be in the client's ITSM system, and then the dashboarding and our sort of workflow in our ITSM systems. And again, we have them bilaterally linked. That's our general integration model on how we progress a ticket through to either give it to the client based on the SOP or act on it on their behalf and close it out, and then they'll have visibility to that. And it's all tied to SLAs as well. There's a bit of customization. Each client is different, but we have a core functionality and capability that we apply to that.
Thank you. I have another question. This one is around the hybrid cloud. Given the rapid movement to the cloud, often hybrid cloud, can you share on ways enterprises may be changing their approaches toward a single centralized SIEM? Maybe Chris, you can help us answer that, or Doug.
Sure, I'll start and then I'll hand it out. Maybe Richard or Doug want to jump in as well. So this is a great point, and I think some of it came up when we were talking about the idea of the logs, right? Hey, I want to move a large amount of logs. So the question would be why, right? Because most people have a hybrid cloud environment. Most enterprises also have some level of on-premise, and most people are moving from some legacy model of log retention, log management, and analytics. It makes sense to be purposeful in how you do that. So from our perspective, the closer you push the analytics to the environment where the logs live in. So if it's an Azure log source, it makes a lot of sense to have the analytics applied within Azure. If you have some on-premise systems, or you're trying to do logs, a whole bunch of log retention, maybe it makes sense to have a separate data lake or a separate place to do that. What we often see now is the integration point is on workflow and operations, and the analytics and the log retention is becoming more federated. That's not always the case. There's some ups and some downs. It's more difficult to do threat hunting when it's a distributed sort of data sets. It's a little bit more difficult sometimes to do forensics, but some of the savings from data transfer, some of the savings and some of the efficacy from native analytics applied in native environments can outweigh that. So it's an emerging area. There's lots of different ways to sort of skin that proverbial cat. But we are seeing a look at federating it to looking at analytics that are closer to where the data resides, and then the workflow being more driven by the ITSM side of the shop. At least that's what we're seeing on the PwC side. Richard, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, over the last few years, I've had the fortune of meeting a lot of SOC teams as they've gone through this transition period, and looking at what data is coming into their SIEM hasn't been something they've always done with a fine tooth comb. It's more about the more I can put in the SIEM, the more I can see, and the fear is, what if I don't have it in the SIEM, I don't see it. The downside is if you keep filling up your bucket, you're going to end up with a big bill at the end of the day. So it certainly is about optimizing. I think the real question was about a single SIEM. So let's start with the fact that you may already have an on-premises server-based SIEM, or it could be running as a cloud, but it's running as a server. The data feed into that is usually local to where that server or service is. As you move to the cloud, the first starting point is generally cloud logs. So cloud logs stay in the cloud, and on-premises logs stay on premises. But eventually, you don't want to run two SIEMs. You want to get to the point where your team has one pane of glass, one place to do their analysis, and you bring all that data into Sentinel. So some companies may take a few weeks to a few months to do that. Others have a 1 or 2 year plan to actually migrate and transition over. But yeah, as Chris was saying, you certainly want to make sure and Doug was saying about use cases, make sure that the data that you do decide to put into Sentinel is useful data, and you're not just collecting it for the just in case purposes. That shouldn't go into Sentinel, that should go into a data lake in Azure that Sentinel can get to for extended hunting.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Doug. I want to thank all of you again for today's informative webinar, as well as our wonderful audience for their participation. We always say security is a team sport, and by working together, we can strive for a cyber secure and resilient enterprises. So with that, I want to give it back to Paulette, and thank again for attending. Paulette?
Wonderful. Thank you, Miriam. And thank you, Richard, Chris, and Doug for the great presentation today and the information, and Miriam certainly for your great moderating. And thanks everyone that attended. We do value your feedback to help us improve our future events like this, and welcome your input on the information we shared today. There is a slide up with the survey link as well as in the chat window. This concludes today's webinar. Again, thank you all for joining, and I hope everyone has a nice rest of the day. Thank you again.